I think it was actually you, Sean, who at the NAMM show mentioned this to me, which is that analog does some things better, digital does other things better, and they're both great tools. Can you talk more about that concept?
Yeah, I mean, Ed will agree with me completely. So first of all, the best EQs in the world are in terms of doing the thing perfectly and giving you loads of controls. You're not going to beat a linear phase EQ in a DAW. It's just, they're incredible. DSP is so powerful. You could get any frequency value you want. You can get any dB value you want. I mean, the amount of precise control you have is unmatched in the digital realm. And yeah, I mean, DSP is very powerful. It can do transformations. It can do, equalization, compression, whatever you want. Cleanest compressor, a DSP compressor can be very clean and cleaner or just as clean as the cleanest analog compressor, and with a lot more fine control. And you have things like look ahead, right? Because you have in a DAW, you have a recorded track. So it can look ahead on that recorded track and say, I predict this is going to happen, or this is coming in, this signal is about to hit my DSP. I will pre-compensate for that. I will apply this compression there. That's how you get brick wall limiting and stuff in DAWs and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, plugins are incredible, especially I think plugin developers that they have unlimited GUIs. There's so much stuff they can do. There's a lot of fantastic plugins being made these days. Sorry.
Perfect matching.
Perfect matching is another example. Any other you can think of, Ed?
It's the one that's off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's just so many. There's so many great things about plugins. Digital's incredible, and especially like if you think about a plugin, it's not hardware, so you're not limited by physical stuff, so you can have 20 instances of a plugin, perfect recall as soon as you load the DAW. I mean, it's unbelievable the convenience and how awesome it is. And you can go anywhere in the world, bring your laptop, you have your full studio. It's incredible. It's absolutely brilliant. Plugins are fantastic. But the one thing, this holds up in blind listening tests, this holds up in our tests, this holds up in terms of what people, when they buy our equipment or buy other analog equipment, what they say. Analog has a sound that is just perfect. It's just magical. And it just is. I don't know why, Kyle. I don't know why electrons running through copper sound so much better than ones and zeros. I don't exactly understand it. I don't exactly know. It's very chaotic. There's a lot to it, but it just does. Now, what I'd say is if you use 8 to 10 to 12 plugins and you're really good at them and you know them inside and out, you could pretty much get any sound you could, like the most beautiful saturated sound that you've ever gotten on a piece of analog equipment, you could probably get 98% of there, 99% there with enough tweaking and enough time, But what analog's really great at is vibe. If you just take a signal and run it through it, it just has a sound and it like immediately sounds good. So that's why I like to use analog equipment during the tracking phase, actually. A lot of people these days don't like to track with a lot of processing. I go the other way. I like to track with processing, but just not a lot of processing. I think of tracking as the vibe. Like this is the time for me to get a good performance from the vocalists, from the drummers, from the guitarists, get the sound or get a good sound, a good rough sound that they're pleased with, that inspires their performance, and it gives it a character. Then I'll go and do the surgical stuff later during the mixdown phase, almost exclusively through plugins, maybe some outboard equipment, because it's just for certain things. But that's your typical hybrid workflow these days. I mean, people use the best bits of analog where they think it's the best. I'll give you an example. A lot of master engineers, like it's a full analog chain because they think they can get better quality going through analog. And, maybe they're right. Maybe, I don't know. It's up to them to decide. Mix engineers, a lot of mix engineers will swear by certain pieces of hardware that it's like their secret sauce, and they'll run it out of the DAW, run stems, whatever, into hardware and then come back in. Other people, and I'm talking about some of the biggest engineers in the world, are like exclusively plugins now, almost exclusively plugins. Now, they have to have some analog outboard because in order to record an equipment, it has to go from a transducer, like a microphone, into an amplifier, a preamp, into line level inputs on a converter, into an A to D stage. So there's still, even when you completely go plugins, if you're completely plugins, you still have a lot of analog hardware that you're using. The preamps and the conversion, stuff like that. So what is analog good at? Analog's not good at being perfect, typically. I mean, aside from like transformerless preamps and really transparent preamps and really high-end converters. But if you're talking about equalizers and compressors, people don't revere pieces of analog hardware because of, when talking about compressors and EQs, typically because they're clean. They like it because there's a character to them. They have a sound. So that's where I feel like analog is vibe and color. and digital's precision, generally.
And like you said, the digital can probably, with enough time and skill, mimic what that vibe that analog just does automatically does, right? You could probably make a model, and many have made models of legendary 1176s, LA2As that give that vibe. But that's a lot of processing. That's a lot of programming that goes into that. Whereas you run your signal through a character preamp, and it's just going to automatically give you that distortion that we've grown accustomed to over years and years of listening to music, right? You hear Sam Cooke go a little bit heavier into the mic. You hear Ray Charles go a little bit heavier into the mic and into the preamp and into the input of the tape machine and onto the tape itself. And all of those stages react the way that they react because that's all we ever used was analog gear. And now when someone goes a little heavier into the mic, digital will just be completely linear all the way up to and beyond 0 dB full scale. And we're like, hey man, what's missing? Where's that distortion? Where's that richness that I'm used to hearing? And that's where I think analog is, it's like almost an easy button. You put a signal through that analog piece of gear, and you know that if it's designed properly, if you overdrive it, if you take it to its limits, it's going to give you that sweetness that you've grown to love. Whether you're using analog or digital, the acoustics of your space will have a huge impact on sound quality. Get free instructions for building your own acoustic panels at audiouniversityonline.com/acoustic panel blueprint.
Even if you drive it into clipping, absolutely, it's going to add a lot of richness. But a lot of analog equipment just still, like I'll give you an example, compressors. Like you don't have to be driving it hard. Like let's say a really well-revered Varimu compressor, something like an RS-124 or a Stahl Level or one of these epic, classic Varimu compressors that are like or Fairchilds, right? Like these iconic pieces of kit. You don't have to be driving them anywhere near clip, but the Varimu properties of that compression ratio is so chaotic that it is next to impossible to replicate in DSP. I say next to impossible. I'm sure somebody spent so long doing it, but my point is that what is affecting something like a Varimu ratio of a compressor, that is such a chaotic thing. That's such an there's so many variables. I like literally tens of thousands that go into that circuit that affect that temperature, humidity, so many things, or optical circuits, opto compressors, same thing, right? Like a big thing about optical compressors is like, oh, what opto cell are you using? Are you using the original one? Because that's what's going to give it the ballistics. That's what's going to give it the time constants that sound pleasing, And so, yeah, I mean, it basically analog gear, everything has a sound because of reasons, because the electronic circuits are not perfect, and there's interactions happening, thousands of interactions happening in a circuit that give it a sound. And the challenge for DSP developers is, do you mimic the effect as in like, I have one piece of kit that sounds great. I'm going to mimic that THD curve. I'm going to mimic that phase curve. I'm going to mimic that ratio curve when I run this source through it. Because everyone says that sounds great. I'm going to apply that. That's what I'm going to write DSP to do that. Or you can do the physical modeling approach where you model the circuit, which I don't understand how people do this because there's too many things to factor in, but they do it. So they do physical modeling where they basically reconstruct the physical circuit and all the interdependencies and all the imperfect things and all the, they do all of that and then write DSP for that. So that's very challenging. I don't, there's some companies that do that, which is amazing. I don't understand how they can do all of the possible physical interactions just because we know how many there are. I mean, they're just so numerous.
You can, even with the top of the line simulation tools that I use to actually design things, that doesn't capture every parameter of every part, and sometimes that matters. Sometimes you end up with something that's really quite different when you build it on the bench as to how it went on the simulations. It doesn't matter how good your models, of each part, even when you're modeling literally every single transistor, resistor, capacitor in the circuit. Those models are never perfect, and you can have hundreds of parts. You're not going to be able to go through and measure all of these parameters that may not even be entirely understood to get a perfect physical model. It's just not possible. You can get close, but you can't get 100% perfect.
But a lot of these physical models sound good, so they've probably done enough to capture what most people think is, relevant. So, again, it's down to subjectivity. Whenever you're talking about this sort of pleasing distortion or what this box sounds like or something like that, man, it's tricky, and there's a fine line between snake oil and and real, but as well, So it's plugin developers have a hard job. I think making a perfect plugin that sounds great and has all sorts of parameters, that's kind of easy. I think the real challenge is like recreating analog gear. That is just so hard to do, and hard because you can even do a great job of it, and people cannot think you've done a great job of it. And equally, you could have cut corners, but people say, "Hey, it sounds good on this," and it reminds me of this. So it's just a tough thing. Whereas what's great about analog is it's like it's the thing. The circuit is the thing. You're using that op amp there. You're using that transistor there. You're using that transformer there. So as chaotic as it is, as long as you're always using the same parts, it's going to be the thing. It's going to be that thing. And that's why a lot of people, if you're talking about old analog hardware, a lot of people are really specific about what components they're using. Oh, are you using the original optocell? Are you using the original tubes? Are you using new old stock tubes? Are you using, did you get new old stock op amps? Did you get new old stock germanium diodes? These are the things these are the little subtle differences that make the character and make the sound of these boxes. So it's a minefield.